What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Jake Fletcher Show podcast. Very honored to be bringing you guys a amazingly interesting topic today with an incredibly interesting individual, Scott Carson, coming to the show direct from Austin, Texas. He is one of the note closers from the Note Closer podcast, multiple thousands of subscribers on their YouTube, on their Instagram, and just incredible podcast. Highly recommend every one of you go out and subscribe to it, listen to it, whatever podcast platform or YouTube that you use, they're on it. And it's a fantastic show. So honored to have you and a pleasure to have you as well, Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm honored to be here, Jake. Doing well. It was a gorgeous day here in Austin, Texas, and excited about what 2021 has to offer. Yeah, if you can see my background, it's a green screen. Otherwise, I was wearing green because it's St. Patrick's Day, but I would just be a floating head with a green screen.
That's so funny. Like 20 minutes ago, my girlfriend came home and she's like, she works in a hospital. So, and I'm in the real estate trenches, and she comes home. She's like, my sister just texted me and it's St. Patrick's Day today. And I was like, oh, really? Like, we didn't even know that it was St. Patrick's Day because we're like on another tip from drinking green beer right now. But, much love to everyone out there drinking green beer today. So, yeah. So where can the people find you online? Give us your top socials and handles.
The easiest place is our website, weclosenotes.com. That's the main kind of, I guess you say mothership where everything is at, our podcast, our blogs, our education, and our deal flow and stuff like that. So weclosenotes.com, but always encourage you to check out the Note Closer Show podcast. We're pretty excited. 670 episodes, 1.2 downloads over our 4-year period. So yeah, then wow. we're in a small niche, but people love our little niche of distressed debt investing. So yeah, it's rocking and rolling, man.
1.2 million downloads. That's incredible. I don't even want to say my numbers now.
Well, you know what? Everybody starts at the same spot. And so podcasting, it's like, a lot of people getting compared in a way. You can't be that way. I mean, I never thought I'd hit 1 million downloads with my show. I was just happy getting out because my niche of real estate investing is roughly about 10,000 people. Not everybody is listening to podcasts. And so we've been fortunate enough. We do a pretty good job of marketing it and, sharing it across social media, our Facebook and YouTube channels and stuff like that. And so I think the biggest thing, man, is you're doing it and being consistent with it. You're doing a great job. I highly recommend anybody listening to hit that subscribe button, go on over and leave Jake a 5-star review right now. Because we as podcasters love to hear from our audience, to see what's going on. It's really a lot of times we feel like we're speaking into an empty room sometimes. It's nice having interviews. It's nice having interviews, but I do a lot of solo episodes teaching. So it's always good to hear from people. You're doing a great job with the Jake Fletcher Show, man. Just absolutely rocking it out and just stick with it. You'll hit numbers. Just a matter of time. You know what I mean? And it really kind of builds upon itself like a snowball.
Thank you. I appreciate the words of encouragement. And, at the end of the day, I have fun doing it. So even if nobody listened, it's cool to just like document it or from the standpoint of just documenting like what's going on, what I'm thinking about at this point in my life. So like maybe later if I have like grandkids or something, they can go watch Grandpa Jake's, podcast and see what I was doing, So it's just a pleasure to have this outlet because personally I come from the music industry before I got into real estate. So this is one of my creative outlets, and making videos and stuff. So I love it, man. And meeting people like yourself is a great added bonus to that as well, and really connecting with people and it also it brings people together that otherwise wouldn't have, and it also brings business together that otherwise wouldn't have happened. Have you experienced that with you guys' show?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I thank God for the podcast. Thank God for Zoom over the last 12 months because we've been basically hunkered down like most people, not traveling anymore. And you used to travel 30, 40 trips a year, either for business or personal and fun and vacation and stuff. So yeah, it's been really good. I mean, connected with the people. Like I just had Dean Graziosi on my show just recently.
Awesome. Congrats.
He was a great, thanks man. It was a great, he's one of my top 3 that I've always wanted to have on my show. With Steve Sims, who's the author of Blue Fishing and works with the likes of Elton John, Sir Richard Branson, talking about some motivation stuff. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Every time you have ups and downs. and we crank out a lot of episodes, but it's really the most amazing thing that I love about it is the connections of being able to have somebody on like yourself that we can just connect, network from 1,000 miles away. But also it builds a lasting impression. Like today, I had a couple guys that have had me on their shows out of Durham, North Carolina. I was sending them a deal to take a look at, and vice versa. They came across a couple lists, a couple deals a couple weeks ago, and they were sending me deals, which is surprising. We've never met in person. It's all been via Zoom, and either because I was on their podcast and they were on mine. It gives people the true opportunity to understand really what you're looking for. And then, of course, our listeners, we get a lot of people that follow us and listen to us, and they'll sign up for our workshops, or they'll invest with us, or they'll come across a deal or reach out. Like I had a guy out of Iowa who's listening to my podcast reach out. I've got a deal in Iowa for some weird reason in the middle of the cornfields. And so he's going to close on this deal, which I was like, I don't have anybody else in my database from Iowa. So it's perfect. So you never know who you're going to talk to. And that's the thing, we talk about numbers, and everybody gets excited about numbers, but here's the thing. And I learned this from Gary Vaynerchuk years ago. When I first started doing videos on YouTube and really started getting serious about a podcast, doing Facebook Lives, all you really need is just at least one listener. And if you can add one listener new per day to your database or to your listenership out there, you're growing, and all you've got to do is impact one listener. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that talk about, millions of downloads over the years. And I always kind of crack up when I hear that, because I'm always asking, like, how long is your podcast? And for people that have a 5 or 15 minute podcast, okay, great. Yeah, people can listen to 4 episodes in the time it takes to listen to one of my episodes. And that's fine. But you better have a lot of downloads. Otherwise, people really aren't listening if you've got a short podcast. You know what I mean? If you've got a longer 30-minute, hour-long podcast, I would rather listen to that and talk with those people, because they're committed, they're listening, and they're really hanging around and really digesting what you have to give them.
That's so true, man. And sometimes I look at my downloads and I'm honestly a little surprised. I'm like, oh, really? There's really actually people downloading this. That's awesome.
Yeah, just
So,
consistency, just sticking with it. That's the biggest thing. You hit 50 episodes, that's great. 100, you're in the top like 1 or 2% people that hit 100 episodes, and then the next one after that's really 300 episodes, and then going from there. So you're on the right path, man. Just keep doing what you're doing. I know that obviously people are listening, people are liking, and so you're adding value and content to your audience out there, whether they'll reach out and say hi or not.
yeah, well, I'm sure you and I could talk podcasts all day, because that's it's something that we do. But today we're talking about distressed debt investing. So what is that? What does your company do? Give us a little synopsis of what it is that we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah. So for those out there, everybody has to realize everybody's in the debt game. We're all in the note business. Unfortunately, most people are on the wrong side of the payment streams. You're paying out versus having people pay into you. And what I do, and I've been doing this since 2004, and really all I focused on in real estate since 2008, is buying mortgages. I buy distressed debt on residential commercial properties. We're not dealing with homeowners. I mean, we deal with them after we buy the debt, but we're dealing directly with banks and lending institutions across the country, where they've got a list, or as we call it in the world, a tape, which is just an Excel spreadsheet with all their non-performing notes on it, and they'll send these out to us, whether it's one note they've got or 1,000 that we can cherry pick from. And what we do is we'll evaluate that debt. We'll look at the value of the property, what's going on with it. We look at the borrower, what's their payment back history, what's their notes that they've given when they called in, or the bank's called to try to collect payments on them. And we'll usually buy that debt at a big discount. And how we make our money, and that's what everybody wants to know, how would you make money investing in a non-performing note? We make our money in basically 2 ways. One, the number one way we make money is by buying that debt and then reaching back out to the homeowner and say, listen, what happened? What's the country western song that caused you to stop? Is it COVID? Did you get laid off from work? Did you go through the big D? Did you just get lazy and not want to pay? What is it? Can we get you back on track? And that's the big way that we make money, is getting people back on track, starting paying on time, or doing a loan mod or a forbearance agreement, and holding that for cash flow for 12, 24, 36 months. After 12 months of payments on time, it becomes what's called a performing note again versus non-performing. And if we bought that note at 50 cents on the dollar, we can turn around and sell that note back to Wall Street or back to other funds for 80, 90 cents on the dollar. So it's a pretty good return on investment to pick it up at 50, have a 30 to 40% profit margin plus payments along the way. And that's a big bonus to us. We make some big money in the debt space. That's why banks are always the biggest companies out there, because they're in the debt space and arbitrage and stuff. The other way is if the borrower won't work with us, they tell us to go pound sand, or they can't come back up with a payment plan or can't back on the track, is that we'll then go the legal route. We'll either offer them a deed in lieu where they can walk away from the property. We'll forgive them the debt and just take the property back. If they won't work with us, then we go the legal route to start the foreclosure process, and then foreclose, sell the property either at auction or take it back and do a little bit of upkeep, repair to it, sell it as an REO, or even keep it if we wanted to. Keep it if it's in a couple states. We like keep it as a rental, or turn around and owner finance the property we want. So that's what we do is in the debt space. It's kind of a watered down version of the movie The Big Short, if you guys have ever seen that or read the book out there. I've been doing this for 13 years, basically nonstop now, and it's been an interesting 12 months. I'll tell you right now, 2021 is going to be an amazing year in the debt space. I'm licking my chops. It's always interesting. People always talk about markets being great on the upside. I always start worrying when I start getting phone calls and emails from bankers. Usually it's me reaching out to them. And over the last 6+ months, I've had a lot of phone calls and emails from asset managers calling me, asking me what I'm buying, because they're planning on offloading a lot of this distressed commercial debt, and then also residential debt as well. So that's kind of what I do in a long-winded answer for you, Jake.
No, that was great. And I definitely want to dive into that current, those phone calls that you've been getting. But I want to back up for 1 second, just for the people who aren't real estate heads in the audience, because I cater to an audience that's entrepreneurs in all types of categories. I also touch on tech stuff. We've done like a 3D home printing show.
Nice.
and doing some things that are not necessarily people who speak the lingo. So give us a quick rundown of what is a non-performing loan, a non-performing note, and what do you mean by note? Is that just a synonym for a mortgage? And then also too, after that, I noticed you said you've been in around 13 years. So tell us a little bit of what it was like there in 2008 and thereafter as well.
Yeah, sure. So a note is a mortgage, an IOU, a debt instrument. You can buy debt on any type of like IOUs, whether it's car, auto debt, mortgage debt, which is what I focus on, credit card, medical billing, whatever, student loan debt. I just focus on buying debt on residential commercial properties. And when I say a note, that's a mortgage, and you have a first or second, or even in some cases, a third position lien. I only focus on first liens in my business. And so we focus on that. And by non-performing, what I mean by that, that's somebody, the borrower, who has not paid usually at least 3 months or greater. They've not paid on time, or not even paid at all for 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. In some cases, years we've seen. Like I'm looking at a portfolio right now where the borrowers haven't paid in at least 2 years straight. So, and when they haven't paid in 2 years straight, the bank, instead of foreclosing, a lot of times will sell that debt at a big discount, 30, 40, 50, 60 cents off of what's owed or the value of the property, which kind of incentivizes us to come in because we can pick up that asset at a big discount, knowing that the value of the property may be 100 and we're picking up for, say 30 cents on the dollar. And we make our money by kind of creating lemonade out of lemons, if you could say that, for the most part. So that's kind of a little bit of basic info. I'm not buying the property. I'm usually buying the debt, which the loan is collateralized by the actual value of the property. So we do, like I said, we do a lot of research on the borrowers. We also do a lot of research on the property values and conditioning, and kind of go from there. So
how about real quick, I wanted to jump in on people who have negatively amortized, can never say that, loans. So essentially people who the amount that they're paying on their monthly payment will never pay off the debt because they're essentially only paying interest. They're never paying down the principal. Is working with you guys an option for people like that as well? Or is it simply people who haven't been, as you say, performing?
So I work with banks. I don't handle phone calls I'm not mailing out postcards or yell letters to people that aren't paying.
Got it.
Because I never know who their lender is until and Bank of America, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, I'm not buying from those big, 4 to 5 because they want you to write a $50 million check. So I don't usually deal with the consumer. I deal with the consumer after we buy the debt because we know that we've got a discount there. We'll target short sales every once in a while and buy the debt and then approve a short sale in some cases. But I'm not, the negative AM loans as an ex-mortgage banker, I understand there's a lot of people out there that did negative AM loans. Fortunately, there's not that many around anymore.
Right.
But we do deal with a lot of people who are upside down on their house where they owe more than what the property's worth through either late pays or the property values have dropped in an area or other reasons. So I actually prefer buying debt on upside down houses because it really gives us the flexibility and to work with the bar. And the bar is more motivated to work with us versus if there's a ton of equity and we buy that debt at a discount, they're going to fight us most of the time if they won't work with us to keep their property, keep their equity. So as an ex-mortgage broker and banker back in the heyday, 2004 to 2008, negative AM loans were really, really hot, whether it was a primary residence where you were only paying a partial interest payment. Now, of course, interest rates were at 5-6% back then, which is considered high now compared to where everything is at.
Right.
But when you say that, you have a 6% interest rate, and let's just use some simple numbers. $100,000 house, that means your interest only part of it should be $6,000 a year. Well, a negative AM loan was doing 1 to 1.5% payments, whereas the other 4.5%. So basically, you're only paying $1,500 in interest only on those mortgages, and $4,500 was going to the face amount of the loan at the end of every year. So if you had negative AM and you're just making the minimum payment, your balance year one was 100,000, year two 104,000, year three 108, and going from there. And that was a big cause, especially in California when everything hit the fan in 2008, with all these people that thought value will keep going up. I'll never be over encumbered on my house, and that's not the case when the music stopped. So, 2008, 9, and 10 were interesting years. I mean, in 2010, we had over 15 million homeowners underwater. Still to this day, before COVID kicked in, we were still seeing about 3 million people across the country, 3 to 4 million people that were still upside down in their house. The scary thing is that most people don't realize is before COVID kicked in and shut the country down, 1 out of every 9 to 10 Americans was already 30 days behind on their mortgage pre-COVID. Wow. And so and the last year, with the government basically kicking the can down the road and stopping foreclosures and evictions, that's given people time to get back on track. But things are coming to the end here in the next 90 days for that foreclosure and eviction moratorium. It's already started to pick up in some states. It's going to be an interesting time. Now, I don't think we're going to see the huge wave of foreclosures and REOs that we saw back in 8, 9, 10, 11, because what's going to happen is banks are going to sell the debt off to institutions or firms like my company, and we'll go in and immediately modify to keep the people in the home. And the government loans, that'll be worked out and kept fine, everything for the most part. But the ones that you're going to see the most impact on across the country, and yes, real estate can be great. We keep going up. You're going to see properties where it's been out-of-state investors, the mom pops who've bought a rental property or bought a condo or something out of state, but they weren't there. They couldn't afford to keep the payments. They didn't have any reserves, and they can't, it's investment property. Those type of loans weren't in the forbearance agreements or stopped on. It's a different thing versus the owner-occupied assets. So you're going to see a lot of investment properties going to foreclosure, out-of-state owners trying to sell off. You're seeing a lot of small balance commercial, the sub $5 million value commercial stuff. A lot of that's in default with businesses going out of business and retail centers and big box stores, stuff like that. So that stuff's already hitting the market we see right now, especially hotels or student housing. So yeah, I'm licking my chops, man. There's a lot of opportunity if you know where to look. It's not going to be as big a bloodbath as 2008, 9, 10, but there can be a lot of opportunity if you know where to look.
Mm-hmm. What was that 2008 to 2010 distressed debt market like? Like, describe what the day-to-day was like versus kind of what you're expecting now.
So here's the thing is 2008, 9, and 10, crazy. We would get listened from bank. I'll give you an example. You've been to Miami. You've ever been to Miami Beach? Miami?
Many times
a week. Many times, right? Yeah, exactly. Like that whole strip there, like from Sunny Isles down to Miami,
South
South Miami
Beach.
Beach, in
Yeah.
South Beach. Can you imagine, those condos in there, like what, a cheap one's 200 grand, 300 grand. Most of them are over $500,000.
For a studio. Yeah.
Yeah, for a studio, exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to buy that debt for pennies on the dollar. Like, I'm not joking, 5 grand, 10 grand on a 2-2 on the water, 10-story up, clean, needs no work. We saw a list like that we buy the debt. It'd take us a year and a half to foreclose, but the bank were just wanting to get rid of it. They're like, buy anything. I dealt with Capital One, what's in your wallet, and we got a list in when I reached out to them, to the right department. They sent me a list of 33-page PDF that all their small balance sub $1 million commercial loans were in 6-point font, very, very small. You almost need a magnifying glass. I'm like, I can't buy all this. Like, no, buy anything, please buy anything.
Right.
And so banks were desperate to get that non-performing stuff off their books so they could get, okay, sell it for 50 cents on the dollar, even 10 cents a dollar. Because now they could get it off their books. They could take that 10% and go out and lend it out or arbitrage it into bigger things. It was a crazy time. And a lot of us in the industry only thought that would last 3 to 5 years. It lasted, 7, 8 years. Even up to, I'd say even 2018, we're still seeing a lot of stuff. It's slowed down a little bit the last few years, but there's still been opportunity because there's still defaults. There's still foreclosures out there. So it was just a crazy time. I mean, it was this whole, like, I guess you could say, shadow market, shadow inventory kind of rose up. I think the best analogy I could put would be have you ever seen the movies with Jonah Hill and the Teller Kid, War Dogs, where they're selling guns to the government in between? They were living off, as they say, there's a lot of crumbs in between the cracks. Or for a lot of note investors, there was a lot of nice crumbs that the banks, big banks, wanted to get rid of, and even the smaller banks didn't know how to move. And if you could come in and had cash to buy this stuff and didn't mind holding on to it for 6 to 12 months to foreclose or trying to work it out with a borrower, you were making a lot of money. It's best thing is like the resolution, the RTC days, or the savings and loan crisis of the 80s. Millionaires were made in that area. Same thing, 2008, 9, and 10. A lot of millionaires were made because they bought distressed debt and assets at a big discount. It's the same thing already starting right now. I mean, Wall Street has been pulling money back for the last couple of years, expecting something to happen, and it's finally starting to happen. The government is slowing it down a little bit by putting these foreclosure moratoriums, but I don't know, man. I don't think it'd be as bad, but it's going to be interesting. I mean, all you've got to do to drive around any town, and you're seeing increased, for lease signs or businesses going out of business. It's been such an interesting time with real estate climbing up. We're due for correction. Now it's not going to be everywhere. Like Austin, I don't think we'll see much of a correction here. Miami may not see much of a correction, but there's a lot of other areas out there that have been impacted hard. I think like Orlando with the hospitality and the theme parks and the cruise industries there in Miami. Obviously, California's still been hit hard because they've been on lockdown for the most part. Just got to know where to go. Even colleges, you have a lot of student housing out there has been hit hard because kids aren't going to school. They're not showing up to the dorms. And so you have all this kind of ground zero around the university, all these businesses that rely on students showing up, restaurants, bars and stuff like that have been closed down. That there's a lot of opportunity if you know where to play and playing the, as they say, the shadow market.
And the benefit for these banks to work with an individual like yourself or a company like yours is essentially that they can sort of free up this sort of this frozen liquidity that they have on their balance sheets, and then take that and do stuff that's maybe less risky for them, and that they because presumably they don't have a whole department of people like yourself, because it wouldn't be a financially equitable structure for them to have in place in times where there aren't as many distressed sales, right? So what happens during those times though, when there aren't as many crumbs, so to speak? What do you guys do then?
Well, there's always debt. I mean, so it may be more residential than commercial, or maybe more commercial than residential. And our goal is, there's a lot of smaller institutions out there that bought debt that may have portfolios they're looking to get rid of, not just banks, but investment REITs and stuff like that, insurance companies that have bought a lot of this stuff that are looking to move it off. Like I'm picking up 2 assets right now, in one on Miami Beach overlooking Biscayne Bay, and then another one in Cutler Bay, Florida. Beautiful houses, beautiful condo. that I'm picking up for like 50 cents on the dollar because the fund is closing down. They were around for 5 years. They got to close down. So these are the last 2 assets, and they're going to take a big haircut on them because they've already made a bunch of the profit. They just need to dump these assets. And they're in great condition, beautiful. I just got BPOs back today on them. And I was dancing a happy jig before I jumped on here because I was pretty excited about it. I mean, it's picturesque. But what happens is that there's a lot of things like, we had all these foreclosures, and you had a lot of HUD foreclosures take place. Fannie Mae, HUD had hundreds of thousands of small balance foreclosures. Well, you had some funds come in by these big portfolios of REOs back in the day, and they turn around and order finance them via like contract for deeds in Ohio and Michigan. And so that was really popular the last couple of years, is buying this non-performing or performing contract for deeds that you could buy at 30, 40 cents of the dollar, that were at like a 9 to 10% interest rate to the borrowers. And if you could buy them cheap enough, I mean, if it's at a 10% interest rate and you buy it at 30 cents and you get the borrower back on track, that's a 30% ROI for basically just giving them a handout out of the hole they've done until they just start paying again. So we bought a lot of those, worked them out, incentivized the borrowers to pay. If they wouldn't pay, then we would give them cash and walk. And then we've got a nice asset that's appreciated over the last 5-6 years quite a bit, that we bought at a big discount. Now it makes sense for us to sell it or turn it into rentals, or whatever we need to, if it's in an area that we like, that isn't like a 2-gun alley of any sort,
Yeah. And for the layman's listening, a BPO is a broker price opinion. So when Scott says he was dancing a jig, it's because the price would look nice.
Yeah. I mean, the BPO came in over 700. They owe right at 725, and we're picking it up for 441. I mean, it's just almost a $300,000 difference between that. And then the attorney notified me that the foreclosure auction's in May. So it's like a less than a 90-day turnaround for us on this deal, which doesn't happen very often. Usually it's a longer process of at least 6, if not 12 months, every deal we buy. So it's a different time frame than like a fix and flipper who's looking to get in and get out of the property in 90 to 120 days. So
yeah. Now, when somebody buys a distressed property like that, does the value like immediately go up as soon as you buy it, because you're essentially like clearing the debt off the board? Or, I mean, how does that work in terms of a valuation standpoint?
That's a good question. Value is the value. It's going to be all based on comps, comparable market, CMA, comparable market analysis, having a realtor pool value. Here's the thing. We know the value before we're buying the debt. So the debt is different than the property. So what you did see happen a lot back in 2008, 9, 10, when you did have a lot of foreclosures, properties actually went to the foreclosure auction and sold at a discount. A foreclosure can negatively impact the community, a block, by 10, 15, 20 grand or even more, depending on what's going on. Saw that happen many a time. We bought a property that we thought was worth 300, and then 10 foreclosures happened, and then the property dropped to 180 as the bank was selling stuff off and different things. So the only thing that affects it really comes down to the final sale. Now, when we buy the note and then we do take it to foreclosure, we can pick what the bid is at the foreclosure auction. What's the opening bid going to be, and we can bid that up or just accept what's bidded. If nobody bids at the auction, then we end up taking the property back as a real estate owned asset or an REO that we can then sell. So then we'll usually a 90-day period, or we'll clean up the property and try to get it back up to value and comparable, so it doesn't lose a lot of value. So value doesn't fluctuate a lot for us. We know what it is. The one big thing is that we don't evaluate property off of after repair value. A lot of fix and flippers out there are used to looking at a property like, oh, hey, if I put 30 grand into it, it won't be worth 100, it'll be worth 150. And that's my ARV. We don't do any of that. It's as is, how it is. I looked at another property in Durham, North Carolina today. It's got cracked slab in 2 places on it. Yeah, market value is 150 grand on this one, but as it sits right now, it's closer to 40. So that one, we know, the borrower owes 180 on this one. We know that value is really lower than that. We'll probably pay 10, 15 grand for it, knowing that we're going to have to put a lot of work into it to repair it and get it back up, because North Carolina is one of the states that we don't mind taking property back in and doing some fix and flips for it. But most of the part, I like buying occupied assets where the borrower is still living in the property because they're taking care of the property. They might not be paying the taxes, but they're at least, keeping the power on, the gas on, the air conditioner hasn't gone off on vacation, taken a walkabout, or the copper goblins haven't shown up to strip it. You know what I mean? So
Right.
most people don't like, why would you want to occupy? I was like, well, because it's, especially when you look at what we had recently with the snowstorms all across the country, you want somebody in that house keeping the power and the water on, so you don't end up with a, interior water feature when it
Yeah.
thaws out.
Yeah. Oh, a ceiling waterfall. Yeah. Now, are you guys buying these notes cash or are they finance deals? How does that work?
Great question. That is always the number one question. How do we pay for this stuff? It's cash. It's not, you're not going to go get a bank loan from, the bank down the street to buy a non-performing note. So we work with investors exclusively. About 95% of what we're buying is with other people's funds, whether it's their IRA accounts or we've got a fund that we're finalizing, a new fund that we're finalizing to, bring people in at 25 and 50,000 to $100,000 chunks and buying in bulk. But usually it's we leverage a lot of people's IRA accounts. So their self-directed IRAs are a great way for people to fund deals, whether they're buying for their own portfolio or they're wanting to partner with somebody. So we're constantly, one of the big things we're doing is constantly working with investors and marketing out to local investors where we're buying assets, but also other investors saying like, hey, if you're in California, $500,000 will buy you a shed, or $500,000 might buy you 10 properties 10 notes in Columbus that we can pick up at 50 cents on the dollar and get a pretty good cash flow. So occasionally you'll be able to, especially on the commercial side, you can work with the banks. If it's $1 million plus loan, usually if you're buying that note and have an operating team where maybe the borrower's walked away or and start operating that property, sometimes the banks will carry financing for you and move it from the non-performing balance sheet over to the performing side of the bank. And they usually still want you to bring 10 to 20% down towards a note purchase, but that's pretty much free money for the most part to come in and have the bank carry financing, and you don't have to go get qualified for it because it's based on the asset and then your operations team. So usually money, but a lot of people, reach out to us like, oh, I was trying to get in this back in 2008, needed $5 or $10 million. That's not the case. Never has been the case. I started with nothing. I was coming out of a bad situation back in 2008, being divorced, change of partnership, and then in the market taking a dump. And we bought a lot of assets from some pretty good names, and I didn't use any of my own money because I didn't have any of my money. I used other people's money to make it happen and went from there. And there's so much money sitting out on the sidelines right now, not making anything. I think the numbers that we see and track across the country is about 70% of people that have an IRA account of some sort of retirement account have over 150 grand in it just sitting there, not doing anything. And so if you can offer somebody a 4, a 6, an 8% return on their money for them not to do anything and do it passively for 24 to 36 months, a lot of people will jump on that and can be a win-win.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense to have all this cash sitting around not making any money for you. So I know you just kind of alluded to it, but the investors that you work with, what kind of returns do you guys, expect to get for them? And does it depend on the market or the asset class?
Yeah, so you really look at two things. You look at performing notes and non-performing notes. If a performing note, we're going to see somewhere between a 10 and 15% yield to us. And so if somebody wants performing notes, then we'll probably offer them somewhere between a 6 and like an 8% return. And we'll arbitrage the difference. If we're getting paid 15, let's say give 7, 8% of that to investor passively and go from there. If it's non-performing, what we're looking for when we do our due diligence is somewhere around 25 to 30% return on investment, whether we get it reperforming or we have to take the property back. So that's a big key number for us. And that way, if somebody's looking past that, gives us some flexibility to pay them a decent return at 8 to 12%, depending on what the situation looks like. Now, obviously, if they'll invest, somebody who's just going to put like 50 grand with us, that's probably going to be closer to a 6 to 8%. Somebody's going to put 100 grand or more, we'll look at maybe 9 or 10. It all depends on the time frame of the asset, too. Because some states have longer foreclosure time frames versus other, like here in Texas, we can foreclose in like 30 days, whereas like New York can take 2 to 3 years to foreclose. So I don't usually buy in like New York or New Jersey. I am looking at this place in Syracuse, New York today. It's beautiful. Get this 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,500 square foot house. And the seller's willing to sell it to me for 40 grand when it's got a value of around 250 on it right now.
Wow.
And he's just ready to move it to 3 people were on the mortgage, a husband, wife, or a husband and wife, and then a mother-in-law, and they've left the house. They just upped and left. Husband passed away, and so we're having to track down the mother-in-law and the spouse on it, trying to get them to sign the property, but otherwise it's going to be a year plus to foreclose if we have to do that. So, knowing your markets and knowing what's going on, I always say it's the same thing we do on a daily, day out basis, but it's different with every asset. Every borrower story is different, and it makes it exciting to dive in and see who's sent us an email today, or if we've had to reach out to banks and marketed, with an email blast, who sent us what to look at, and go from there.
Now, the investors that you work with, are they only buying, like, for instance, if a distressed asset is, say, $50,000 for the note, hey, Mr. Investor, you need 50,000 to buy, or are people able to buy fractional shares? Like, hey, I have this amount of money. What can you do for me?
So you have to be very careful about that. If you're going to bring in fractional shares, you'd want to get a private placement memorandum, a PPM, a fund of some sort, either a 506C or D, or even a Reg A. If you're going to start pooling money together, you can buy partials. A lot of people will, partials. If you got a performing note, some people can buy, a stream of those payments. Like, hey, I'll give you 10 months of payments for 12 months of payments. We work a little bit in the partials. You see a lot of partials on owner finance deals, not so much directly from banks. And since we're buying 99.9% stuff we buy is institutional based, we're not pulling people's money together. It's usually, hey, if you're funding, you're bringing 100 grand to the table, we're going to use 90 to fund these 2 or 3, and the other 10 grand we'll hold into escrow account for costs along the way. If somebody comes with just 5 or 10 grand, like, not a good fit for us. And this is nothing against people starting off, but those that really, you don't want to take everybody's money, because the ones that only have a little bit, they will be the biggest pitas that you will deal with, the pain in the asses, because it's their last 5 or 10 grand. They're constantly looking, and they're the ones that bother you. Try to deal with sophisticated or accredited investors. They're used to things taking time. They're used to things not going as normal, but they just want solutions. And that's the biggest bit of advice out there. When we all start off as investing, you're trying to raise capital and get deals closed with whatever you can do. But the worst thing you can ever do is go against your gut. If your gut telling you somebody's not a good deal to invest with, then don't do it. Just move on, and hey, let's leave his friends and move on to the next guy or gal that needs to get some stuff done.
Words of wisdom for sure. I think that those individuals who maybe have 5 or 10 grand and are looking for something are probably better served with putting a down payment on a place and buying a buy and hold investment property and make some passive income, build your equity.
Or get a mentor. I mean, you got to realize a lot of times everybody that's been successful has had a coach or a mentor at some point. You know what I mean? And yes, some people are like, I don't want to pay 5 grand or 10 grand for a coach. Well, what's that 10 grand going to save you? Is it going to save you? What are you buying? Are you buying 10 years of experience with somebody who's going to be on the phone with you? Are they going to save you headaches? They're going to save you from making a big mistake that'll cost you 100 grand. There's a guy that reached out to me just the other day, and he was like, you want my coach students? He's getting ready to buy this note to pay 18 grand for it. And I'm like, did you pull values? Well, he goes, well, the seller sent me some values. I'm like, no. You pull your own values, send your own realtor out to look at the property. And sure enough, it's a piece of shit. It's not worth the money he's paying for it. And I'm like, it looks like the seller just pulled the Zillow value, didn't look at that. Oh, it's trashed out. The picture online is not what the picture looks like today. And he's like, oh man, you just saved me 18 grand. I'm like, yeah, I was actually saved you a lot more with all the money you would have had to dump into it to get it up to date. So
plus the time and the headache and the stress. And it's kind of like how I always tell people, you don't hire a plumber to do your sewer scope inspection,
Well, that's the thing. You can have Tim, the toolman Taylor, try to replace your electrical, but we don't think it's going to end up working with you can't be a jack of all trades in this industry as well too. Yeah. The best advice I ever got was from one of my mentors. He's like, listen, focus on one thing and get to know that one thing intimately. I think, what is it? Grant Cardone says in 10X, so you've got to have 10,000 hours of something to be an expert at it. And if you're, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I see investors make, is they learn a little bit about this, they learn a little bit about this, a little bit of this, and they know a little bit about everything, but they don't really know everything intimately, and they end up making a lot of mistakes because they think they know, or they're trying to go cheap on YouTube, or trying to go, discount with just talking to their best friend. Don't get me wrong, friends are great, but if they're not pulling the trigger and doing this on a regular basis, then you're getting, advice is like assholes. Everybody has one. You don't want to seek advice. You want to seek counsel from those that are in the trenches and doing it on a day in and day out basis. And most of the most successful people I know in any given field or niche are often the most approachable, and they're glad to share some of their wisdom or advice for some time or a fee, because they've been through the school of hard knocks or they saw things, but they don't want people making the same mistakes they made early on. And that's what I think people fail to realize that a lot of times is your best class may just save you 6 months or 6,000 or 6 times what you're paying for it, because you learn so much more drinking from a fire hydrant and really sitting at the feet of somebody who's an expert at what they're doing versus somebody who's just a novice and go.
Yeah. People often forget that you have to spend money to make money. And sometimes that means spending money to not lose a ton of money. Yeah. And, often it's the people who are the haters against spending money on coaches or classes and, actually investing into their education that don't understand that. And, oh, I can't believe you spent $10,000 on this course or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, but I, got $100,000 worth of value out of it. So would you spend $1 to make 10? I would every day, Well,
and that's the thing too. I'm going to make $100,000 as long as you implement. I'm going to make $50,000 my first deal or make $30,000 my first deal. I mean, that's where else would I get that, And that's, look, I love YouTube. We have a lot of videos on YouTube. I think 1,100 videos on YouTube. It's a great starting point. Podcast, great place to start listening to and doing a Vulcan mind melt. Clubhouse is okay right now. I know Clubhouse is the hot thing. There's some good stuff and there's some really bad advice on Clubhouse too. All right?
Yeah.
And when we all start off, whether you're coming out of a bad situation or starting off, we're all trying to bootstrap ourselves. Those are great places to start learning the basics. But at some point, you're going to need to pull the trigger to attend a class or a workshop. And the beautiful thing these days is there's so many online classes you can take without having to spend money on an airplane or a hotel or do it virtually. It's just, that's the way to go. Learn it. Mm-hmm. But then more importantly, quit learning and start pulling the trigger and applying what you learn. When I first got into when we started our mortgage company in 2004, I was traveling the United States with every other weekend. I was speaking at a different big real estate expo or seminar, and we were traveling on the Ronald Grand circuit. And I would see these same faces every other week as they come to another event. And I always ask them, say, hey, weren't you just here last weekend or something like that? Or weren't you just at this other class? Like, yeah. It's like, how did it go? Oh, it worked great. We sent out flyers or yellow letters or whatever. And we got bombarded with so many leads. I'm like, great. How did that go? Oh, well, we had to go to the next class and the next class, and we didn't have time to call those leads. And I'm just like, just wasting money.
Yeah, it's creative procrastination. I feel, a lot of times people are, and I talk about this often actually in some of my podcasts and videos that people get stuck in the planning phase and they don't realize when it's time to start taking action, and really taking action it's pretty soon. Like it comes pretty quick, like even with just watching, YouTube and getting a little bit of advice, you have enough to start putting your foot on the gas to an extent, maybe don't put your life savings into your first deal, but start getting your feet wet for sure. Don't wait around for years and years watching YouTube, videos before you actually take some action. And yeah, I completely agree. So do you guys do tax deeds at all or not so much?
We dabble a little bit in that. We've got a couple buddies that are really great at that. I mean, that's so different on a state by state basis. Obviously, Texas is one of the better states because of the higher interest rate on the tax deeds and the ability to foreclose. We actually spend more time when we're researching a portfolio of notes. We do look at what's owed in the taxes. And a lot of times we will see if there's a tax deed sale or a tax certificate sale. And we've found a lot of unclaimed funds on some of these notes that we have bought that the existing bank had no clue that there was 75 grand. So, they're waiting for them to claim on, or 50 grand or 5 grand. So we dabble a little bit in that for the most part, but for the most part, we're just buying strictly first lien versus tax liens.
And is that because that's more profitable or it's a more streamlined source of revenue or?
It's because of the bigger impact. I like fishing in big pools versus small pools. And so a tax lien, you may buy a tax certificate and it may take you 3 years before you can foreclose or do anything. And that's okay. It's a great way for passive returns because you're going to get paid at some point. I'm a real estate investor, so I like buying a note that I can usually do something, either A, get the bar back on track for cash flow and revenue, or B, we go the legal route to take the property back for cash and revenue for the most part. So that's the big thing. Like I said, we'll buy occasionally tax deed here or there, but for the most part, we're just getting bombarded. Here's the thing. We have banks and lending institutions that we send an email blast out to that send us lists that we don't have to go out and research a lot of things to try to find a deal. When we get a list of notes from, I'll give you an example, a fund out of California, we send an email blast out. They sent us 71 notes that we can cherry pick from. All the due diligence is there. So I don't have to go out and jump on different counties and see what's going to default or foreclosures. I can see stuff coming into me. So that's part of it. It's just that it's easier on the lead gen for us. That leads to bigger checks too, as well, Jake. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. And, somebody listening might, who heard you say earlier that you don't think it's going to be as big of a bloodbath here coming up with the distressed sales. They might say, well, I mean, hold on, Scott, we've had a year of forbearances, a year, moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. Shouldn't there be all this pent up demand? I mean, we've got 10% at least unemployment and people not making money. Shouldn't it be just this, the levee breaking, so to speak, sooner or later here?
Yes and no. It will all depend on location. Like, it'll be different in every state, and every city will be different on what's going on. I will tell you this: when the government, and I've been on the conference calls with HUD and Fannie and Freddie to hear them, when everything started back in basically a year ago, they planned to do a 6-month forbearance agreement with already a second 6-month extension in line. We've seen that. They already are planning a third extension if it needs to happen on a case-by-case basis. So the governments are, especially the government loans, is planning on and kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit, which is fine. Knew that was going to happen. But like I said, it's that non-government backed loan, which is already going to be hit hard. Yes, you will see in some cases a bloodbath in different areas. In some zip codes, they won't be hardly touched at all. For the most part. So it's all about knowing where that is, what's going on in those markets. We did a webinar Monday night with a guy by the name of Nicholas Gurley, who's with a company called Reventure Consulting. And what he does is he tracks the Bureau of Labor Statistics as far as unemployment rates. Okay. In those cities and in states that have high unemployment rates, yes, you're going to have a bit more of a foreclosure. He also looked at demand. How many new properties are being permitted on a regular basis. And if you see, basically his ratio is basically about a 2% permit ratio. If you start seeing over 2%, they're permitting too much. They're going to have a glutton of stuff that gets built up that doesn't get sold. Then you also look at housing boom, like other areas out there, like he talked about Austin not being a good market, which I can comply because it's just over demand here. We have less than a month of inventory. So anything that comes on the market isn't get sold really fast, even if it is distress. So you're not going to see a big bloodbath. People can sell their houses. Whereas others like Indianapolis, you're going to see a lot of inventory there because it's more blue collar. Orlando is going to be hit a little bit harder because it is so much as people have been relying on, the big employers there, the university, Disney, students, and they've been laid off from work for a while. So all going to be, as they say in real estate, location driven, and knowing what's going on in the numbers there.
Man, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that or read it on the MLS, oh my God, right. This room would be full of nickels right now.
Dollar bills, y'all, dollar bills.
Yeah. I would need one of those electric change things, I just have like a funnel of nickels just 24 hours a day, just feeding into it.
That's not bad, man. That's not a bad image to have. You know what I mean?
I'll take all the nickels I can get. So yeah. How do you guys decide what's a good deal versus not a good deal? When you're looking at distressed debt, is it all the same? I mean, what is your criteria for determining a good deal, and how do you value that?
Great question. So when we get a listing of 100 assets, the first thing we do, we're going to get rid of some states that we don't want to waste our time in. Like New York, New Jersey, most of the time I'm going to get rid of those right off the bat. If I can, what they call cherry picking, If I can just pick what I want off the list, which I can do most of the time, I'll get rid of New York, New Jersey, usually because it's just too long to foreclose in those states. I'll get rid of stuff in Kentucky. Kentucky has a weird licensing requirement where if you're a note buyer, they want you to have $1 million bond. I don't want to pay that. Okay. So we get rid of Kentucky. All right. Then we start looking at property or the property types. Like I don't like mobile homes. So we get rid of mobile homes, raw land. Now I do like condos. We keep basically condos, single families, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. If we can keep those, great. We look at the property. We'll do like a big map. Anything that's very rural, outside of a town, rural route address, rural route 1, we get rid of that. It's too remote for us. We want to be in cities, usually cities that are at least 25,000 or bigger, because if you've got at least a decent sized city, you're going to have realtors, rehabbers, and people looking to move into it. We don't want small cities because it takes forever to get anything done there, and it's not the big demand. So look at that. Then we look at, and then we start looking, how far behind are they? Are they at least 90 days behind? When was the last payment made? If it's less than 90 days, the bank won't take that big of a discount. So we get rid of those that are just barely 30, 60, 90 days in default. I really prefer anything that's over 6 months because then the bank really does start to get more motivated to do that. So we look at those, get rid of the rural ones, look at the default rates. We look at the payment stream with the borrowers. That's when we'll start looking at, what's their last 12 months look like? Did they make 2 payments? Did they make no payments? Did the bank or the lender already start the foreclosure process? If they've already started the foreclosure process, that tells us the borrower has probably not been responsive and to try to stay in their property. Like I said before, I like occupied assets. If I can keep people in their property, that's my first goal. If they have been responsive, then great. That actually adds a bonus to us that we'll go ahead and look at, let's occupy. They've tried to make some payments in the last 12 months. Let's take it to the next level and see what kind of bid that the seller wants for it, and then we'll go from there. But then it's then we usually get rid of higher valued properties for the most part, unless it's in a few states. I like to be in that first time home buyer phase for the most part, unless I'm getting a big discount. So usually, 250 or below is what we prefer to be at, especially if it's going to be occupied. We have the bar back on track. And then it's just a matter of, what's the seller want for this stuff? Let's run some numbers. Let's run some of our exit strategies of what, take the principal and interest payment times 12 and divide that by what the seller wants. And if that's a pretty good, like I said, 25 to 30% return on that number right there, then it makes it to the next phase and go from there. So usually if I get, I get 100 in, I may make bids on 60 of them, a bulk bid, knowing that I'll probably, after pricing and back and forth with the bank, I'll probably end up with 20 to 30. But the banks like to deal with one person for a pool versus 60 people for, individual deals. So we'll make a big pool offering knowing that half of them won't be accepted or countered, or they may be sold off. But it allows for us to control that portfolio a lot faster. And a lot of times the banks will accept less from us on an individual asset basis, because we're buying in bulk. And then it's a matter of just looking at evaluating and looking at taxes and looking at values and pulling title report, seeing where everything is at, what's on the title, the utilities are paid, talking to the city. So it's just like due diligence in a lot of other cases that you would for property, but we just add the whole aspect of, what's the collateral look like? The loan docs, are everything in order there? And then what's the borrower look like from what we can tell in cyber sleuthing or Facebook stalking in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I want to get your opinion on something that just came to mind since you have a mortgage background. So for context, here in South Florida, right now in single family homes in Miami-Dade County, we're at about 4,000 units of inventory, whereas normally we'd be at about 8,000.
Yep.
For condos, that's a much different story. Okay. So for condos, we're at about 10,000 units of inventory, whereas we would be normally at about 15,000. So still, we're still lacking, so to speak, in terms of what we normally would be at, but it's not really, because we're now, as a result, in what I would call normal market conditions, meaning between 6 to 12 months of inventory is how I qualify that. Whereas before, your average condo months of inventory in Miami-Dade was about 15 months of inventory. So one thing as a realtor that in my opinion of why there's so much more, one reason at least why there's so much more inventory for condos, aside from demand issues, and also that dynamic has changed a lot in the last year as well, with people preferring single family homes and so on and so forth a little bit more. But condos are hard to qualify. They're hard to get loans on. From your perspective, what are, if anything, are some strategies or some things that could change in the industry, in the mortgage industry, to allow more home buyers to be able to purchase these condos with, say, like an FHA loan, or potentially with a little bit lower of a credit score or something like that? Because at the end of the day, one of the big things, so that people know what I'm talking about, one of the big reasons why it's hard to buy condos is because the associations don't have sufficient reserves, or things of that nature, where it just, the bank is kind of like, we're good on loaning on this one, but at the end of the day, we just have so much inventory. There's such a housing shortage, and there are people who would buy these condos if they could qualify. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that there's any hope for changes in the industry in that regard?
It's hard to say. Industry changes. It'll vary. I mean, what happens is that banks don't want to be into something, especially a condo, when it's not they prefer. Here's the thing. Banks really approve vanilla. That's their favorite choice when it comes to flavor. Owner occupied homes, for the most part, that's your traditional 3-bedroom, 2-bath that they can sell. The way the condo market works, it's the first one to be in default. It's also the fastest to recover. A lot of times get gobbled up in an REO. Miami is such a unique place because you got so much international money coming into South Florida. I believe the research I saw was, like, look at Miami Beach. You don't have really anything under $1 million on Miami Beach for the most part, condo wise. I mean, you'll have a few places, but that you're going to start seeing, and we're already seeing, is defaulted condos on that $1 million area. Now, if they're not paying their mortgage, they're also not paying the condo association fees too. Mm-hmm. So you're probably going to see a wave of condo foreclosures. Condos associations foreclosing subject to the first liens to get property back and try to rent it out to cover the reserve. So, I've seen banks jump on. Special local banks a lot of times can be a better place for financing because they're there locally. I mean, Oceans Bank down in Miami Beach has been one that's financed a lot of condos in the past. We bought a lot of debt from them. U.S. Century Bank. There's a lot of the local guys often are a little bit more flexible because they understand that they're there locally versus a bigger bank, which when they start tightening up the lending regulations, it's usually your bigger banks that tighten up first. Go from there. So it's when you start seeing more distressed stuff, that's, I think, where there's an opportunity to come in with cash or investor money and buy up a portfolio for a while at a big discount, because the banks will want to get the stuff off their books, or the builders will need to move it. I know there's already been a couple condo developments that are moving to apartments. They're converting to apartments because they can't sell the condos as it is right now. And we've seen that not only in Miami, we've seen that in other areas across the country as well too. So it's hard to say. I wish I had an answer to it, but who knows what the banks are going to do. I mean, you used to have a lot of non-prime lenders out there that would do with a little lower FICO scores, but most of them closed shop, a year ago when everything hit the fan like it is. So I think you just got to hang around if you can have cash, or come in and find some of those things at a discount and then ride it out for a little period till this correction comes back and we get somewhat back to normal. And I think you'll see more lenders pop up, because look, who doesn't want to own real estate in Miami for the most part? It's gorgeous as long as it's not flooding underneath your feet from
Yeah.
from,
no comment on that.
Global warming taking place,
Yeah. So when you're buying distressed debt and distressed properties, does that help the economy as a whole, so to speak? Or, I mean, what's your kind of perception on that?
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. Our biggest goal is, I'm ignoring it, we want to make America great again, one defaulted borrower at a time. Okay. If you've got somebody who hasn't made a mortgage payment in 6 or 12 months, but they want to stay in the house, they're just getting back on their feet. Most of the time, the banks want people to come to the table with all their 3, 6, or 9 months that they're behind on. And people just don't have that. Okay. And then you run into, if they don't have it, then they start the foreclosure process. You've distress taking place. It drops the value of the property down, which is like a drop. It affects the neighbors, the blocks, the zip codes, and things like that. Well, if we step in and buy the debt at a discount, there's no MLS for debt buying, doesn't get recorded anywhere. So that value hasn't really fluctuated. It's the workout with a borrower. If I can keep a borrower in their house and they start paying on time again, great. If I take that 6 months and put it to the face amount of their loan, they take this big weight off their shoulders and they can kind of get back on track again. It avoids a foreclosure. It allows for the properties to stay in good condition. Somebody's taking care of the property versus being a vacant property that can get vandalized or stripped or stuff like that. So yeah, I believe debt buyers are one of the great ways to come in and kind of really help a community out by taking on this stress, working with the homeowners to keep them in their houses, makes for better things. People are having to leave their houses. They're not depressed. They're making wise decisions. You kind of help them kind of rejuvenate their lives and that dream of home ownership, or remove the nightmare that often can become if you've lost your job or don't have money to pay your bills. Because you're going to make a decision: do I put food on the table for my kids with what I have, or am I going to pay my mortgage? Well, everybody's going to side with their family for the most part. It's the borrowers, though, and this is funny, Jake. We have seen borrowers from stalking where they're like, do I pay my mortgage this month, or do I go to Disneyland? That's not the right decision. Okay.
Buy the new Gucci belt.
Yeah, exactly. The Gucci belt, or they haven't paid in 6 months, but they went and bought a brand new car. And I'm like,
yeah,
we need to have a come to Jesus meeting on the phone really fast here. So it's buying debt and keeping people in their houses is always a good thing. Nobody wants to foreclose. Unfortunately, you do have those that you have to, who just can't be helped. And there's also those that got into a house that they shouldn't have gotten into a house because the bank gave them a loan. Like, you had all these lending programs from Bank of America and a few others, especially in the FHA loans, which is the highest default rate of any type of loan out there right now, over 15% default rate. People got into a house, zero down, Bank of America or some other bank covered the closing costs. It was really 100% financing. And now that they've lost their job, or what happens first of the year, tax appraisals come out. So now the tax value is based on the improvements plus the land, just not the land. And that throws them all off because most home buyers are very budget sensitive. And if they've lost their job or reduced hours, but now their mortgage is $200, $300 more a month because the taxes are in there, that's not a win either. So we try to keep them in their houses the best we can, trying to create a win-win-win solution. But in some cases, it's a matter of just like, hey, just bad situation, just sign it over and walk away. And we'll let you get away scot-free and move on. And then you can go, if you've got a few late pays, wait 24 months and you can get back a new mortgage or a new house at that point again.
Yeah. And would you say that the market is always pretty good for distressed debt, or is it better when there's more deals to be had? Like, in other words, are the banks willing to negotiate with you guys a little bit more on the terms when there's a lot more assets on their ledgers than when there's fewer?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. If a bank is an A lender, there's a service out there. There's a third party company out there called Bauer Financial that evaluates banks and credit unions. And I mean, every bank has to file, if they have FDIC insurance, Federal Depository Insurance Corporation insurance, they've got to file a quarterly report with it. And we track those reports. So if a bank has very little bad debt, they're not usually going to be willing to negotiate even on the small stuff that they have. Now, if a bank has a lot of bad debt, we usually track every bank that has more than 5 branches across the country, and it's about 1,700 institutions. Yeah, we can see, you got 20% of your portfolio in default. You need to move some of this stuff. They're much more willing to talk at that point than if it's an A paper lender who's got hardly anything. It doesn't mean we can't buy one-offs from some of these guys, but the ones that are in trouble, they're often a lot more motivated to talk. They're the ones answering the phone calls or responding to LinkedIn invites or reaching out to us when we send an email blast out to them.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned at the beginning about you've had a lot of banks calling you guys about residential and commercial properties. And I know I've noticed as an agent that there are certain commercial sectors that are doing phenomenal, better than before, like warehouses. You can't even find a warehouse to rent. And I've spoken with a few of these warehouse managers, and some of them are just baffled. They're like, we don't even know what's going on, but we're 100%, in terms of their units being filled and having no vacancies. Maybe the random like mechanic shop that's, harder things to fill, but definitely retail, in certain sectors are not doing as well. what have you noticed in that regard, and how do distressed debt investors get involved in that market, and what are the differences between that and residential?
Great, a really great question. I'm glad you asked that. Commercial is a whole different ball game, depending on the asset class. Like industrial and warehouse, you're exactly right. Still doing really well. Not much non-performing stuff because people are still looking to store stuff. What's been hit really hard is restaurant space, retail space, and you really need to know what's going into that specific asset or that location. Big box stores, they're taking a difficult time. Malls across the country, they
All are
expect
done.
50% of them are going to be gone,
Yeah.
and the bigger size, the chain stores, the J.C. Penney's, we know Sears has been gone on life support for years, but
Yeah.
Dillard's and things like that. If you're looking at those areas, you've got to figure something out that you can do with that asset. Buying a non-performing note for 10 cents a dollar only makes sense if you can make a good return on it. There's a lot of empty malls across the country. We kind of avoid those unless it's around something that we can maybe pivot. Like we've seen cities across the country buying up vacant hotels and turning it into homeless housing is a good example. If it's in an area that's got a lot of distress, we've even seen we got a couple of our students that are buying a couple of hotels and converting them to apartment complexes because it's basically set up, and so there's a big need for affordable housing in an area. We've seen a couple of our students buying up a property or a note on an old Walmart or a grocery store and then converting it into executive office or turning it into self-storage facility, climate control, because it's pretty easy to move in those big, the storage containers, whether it's pods or something else like that. So you have to understand what's going on in that market, what's available. I mean, self-storage facilities themselves are usually doing pretty good. You just got to know what's going on. Apartments, for the most part, have stayed pretty high occupancy, pretty high non-vacancy, and the collection rates have been pretty good in the mid-80s and 90s in some cases. What has not done well is the student housing around universities that have been vacant. That's been a big hit. Hotels are roughly hotel debt. If you're in an area that there's not a big, it's a glutton of inventory. New York City, I'll give you a great example. Right on Park Avenue, there's a hotel, 1,300 hotel rooms. Okay, $260 million mortgage on the property. The fund that holds that $260 mortgage is willing to sell for less than 20 cents of what's owed. Somebody's buying it up, and you know what they're doing? They're going to go in, keep it running as a hotel, but start converting half of them into apartments, and not small apartments, because there's a lot of that, but decent size apartments versus just a closet that most people are used to doing that. So you're seeing some transitions. We've got an investor who actually built a hotel and was smart enough and converted it to an apartment complex in March because he knew he wasn't going to be able to. Otherwise, he had to be shut down for 3 months. Vacant, brand new hotel. His investors and bank would not be happy, so he converted it to apartment complex. Basically, got it 90% leased up in like the first 60 days, and had a lot of features. Nice in Arlington, Illinois, actually. One Arlington Way, if you want to check it out. Executive offices took a big hit, or office space took a hit, and so if you can convert that into smaller offices instead of the big, 5,000 square foot, you're renting out a 10 by 10 office. We saw a deal in Colorado, downtown Denver, where an office suite like that, they converted to self-storage, and their biggest, they filled up almost overnight. And what it was all these other businesses that were going out of business, or offices closing down, so they need a place to store their office furniture. So they just moved it across the street, and he filled up his whole executive offices in literally just a matter of weeks with office furniture for them to store it at a fraction of price. So you got to be creative, looking at what an asset is. Look at it. What can you do with it? What's the competition look like in an area? And be flexible. If there are tenants in place, how are they operating? What are they performing at? How can you incentivize them? And that's the nice thing about buying debt at a big discount. You're not on the hook, for the originating that big mortgage. You've got some flexibility, and so we've done a lot of times where we've done like a stair step. Okay, your normal rent's $1,000. Let's start you off at $600, and then in 90 days, let's bump you up to $700 and $800 and get you back up on track, and really kind of give them a win-win. It's a win for us because now we've got a cash cash flowing asset with some step up clauses to it, and it's a win to keep that business in operation and that borrower, willing to work with you. And because the last thing you want is a vacant asset sitting there amongst other vacant assets. You know what I mean?
Right. With all the holding costs and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot more moving parts and due diligence with the commercial side of things, as far as doing economic analysis of the area. And then also you have, if you're going to be changing the zoning use, going and speaking with the municipality and kind of making sure you can even do what it is that you want to do before you buy the asset. I'm guessing then that there must be a much bigger trade-off. Is it percentage wise, or is it just dollar amount? Since it's commercial spaces, we're dealing with much bigger dollar amounts, so it's a bigger payday.
Yeah, it's a bigger dollar amount. It's a longer time frame. A residential deal, I mean, I can buy a one-off note and close in like 3 to 4 days if I need to. Whereas a commercial deal might be normal initial upfront due diligence might be 60 to 90 days before you get to the closing side, and then maybe another 45 afterwards. And then you got, like you said, you've got to figure out and work with the city if it's vacant to either get it rezoned and see what the city wants or what they're willing to give. And that can be a 12-month process right there if it's vacant. So vacant assets on the commercial side, really, you can often sometimes pick them up pretty cheap. And it all comes on with what's going on with the seller. The person on the hook for the mortgage, the actual borrower, what kind of condition are they in? Do they have reserves? A lot of these big Wall Street funds, they're not, they got plenty of money sitting on the Wall Street side. It's that investor like you and me, that mom and pop, that smaller investor who may not have the reserves or the flexibility, who is really hurting, that owner operator that needs some help. And that could be, a win-win there for you, but it may also be, hey, you buy that note at a big discount, you may end up owning that property if they can't hold on and their business doesn't recover.
Right. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you own a mall. You
Yeah.
can't do anything with it.
So we were looking at a mall outside in Lenore, North Carolina. Okay. I can pick up this huge mall that's been vacant for like 2 years for $100,000. Okay. And
Wow.
Amazon had like a facility kind of nearby, and they were using the parking lot to park the Amazon trucks. And so I was like, okay, let's see if we can lease out the space to Amazon for storage or stuff like that. But we were also reaching out to the local police department for their SWAT training, because it would be a great live shooter or live, situation to come in and practice, entering buildings and stuff like that. So we ended up passing on it. It was actually on auction.com.
Yeah.
We were working on, but you got to definitely know what you're getting. Always, if it's not your own eyes, make sure somebody is looking at that asset. Make sure you're picking up exactly what you're paying for, whether it's a realtor or an investor, somebody that they're locally. Always put your eyes on the asset, residential or commercial.
It's one would think that it would behoove the cities and different municipalities to really kind of work with people who are buying these otherwise vacant properties, especially in terms of changing the zoning uses and stuff like that. In your experience, have you found that, especially since we've kind of seen an uptick in the vacancies of these commercial type of properties, have you noticed that municipalities are a little easier to work with, or not as much?
It all depends what's going on, man. Like I'll give you an example. Here in Austin, I wouldn't want to try to rezone anything here in Austin right now. It's just, the city council is just crap. Okay. And you look at other cities across the country too that have enacted things because they think it's a good idea, and it's not a good idea. Like we were talking about Cleveland earlier on. If you're a fix and flipper in Cleveland, there are a lot of deals. But if you're a note investor and you end up you buy a note and then have to foreclose, you're going to have to put up a bond to bring that property up to code before you ever sell it. That means replacing old windows and other things. That's an extra $9 to $10,000 in my budget sheet I don't want to have per asset. You know what I mean? And so you have to look at what's going on. It's, the best people to talk are the code enforcement and the zoning departments when you're buying an asset, especially the commercial side. What's going on? How do you see this? What's around the area? I would also talk to local members if you're buying an asset and there's a membership, a statewide membership, like a apartment owners association or self-storage owners association. That's a great place to go and reach out to get a lot of great information about the asset class and what's going on in that city or that state too. A couple of years ago in Irving, Texas, they lost a huge taxpayer when the Dallas Cowboys moved from Irving and built the new Jerry World in Arlington. So a lot of people were buying apartments in Dallas, but they were buying in Irving. The city was cracking down on them ridiculously for stupid things, for fines and stuff, because they had to replace that lost tax revenue. So it all comes down, talk to your investors. If you're buying in a different city, reach out to the local real estate investors association, the real estate club, talk to people there, see what's going on. Heck, jump on a Southwest flight and fly out there. Spend a couple of days talking to people. That's why I like about living in Austin. I'm really about 2.5 hours from about 90% of the country. I got a lot of Southwest miles when I need to jump on a plane and go out and look at
as long as it's not Frontier or Spirit.
Yeah, you never know. Or Spirit, where they'll charge you for the air. You know what I mean? Who knows?
Right. Spirit, man. If Spirit gets a bad name, but in my experience, Frontier is the worst.
Oh, you're totally. Frontier, by all means, is leading number one in worse. It's just not good. Everything.
I'd rather take a hang glider than fly Frontier.
You might be safer and have a better experience.
You'll definitely have more leg room, that's for sure.
For too long, they're gonna start stacking you, and have stacking people on top of like empty chairs.
You have like a little like pod like they have in Japan, Yeah. So how does somebody get started buying notes and getting into this whole realm?
Good question. I mean, it's different than fix and flipping. It's different than being a landlord. It's a whole different kind of mindset being in the debt game. And we've been teaching classes for about 11 years now. We have a big, every quarter we teach a big 3-day workshop. But I always like to get people started by dipping their toes in water, figure things out, see if this is a fit for you. So you can, watch a ton of videos, listen to a lot of podcasts. Every third Saturday of the month, we teach a 1-day class called Note Weekend. It's kind of the Cliff Notes version of note investing. 9 to 5, it's me teaching how to find, fund, and flip these notes on a kind of abbreviated thing. You're not going to learn everything about note investing in 1 day, let alone 3 days, but it's a great way for you to kind of, like I said, dip your toe in the water and see something you like. It's usually $49. If you guys are interested, if you go to noteweekend.com and type in when you go to register, type in the code Jake, I'll comp you in for free.
Nice. I'm going to drop that in the description below for everybody as well. Noteweekend.com.
Yep. And then click on the register. It asks for information, credit card. Just type in Jake and it should zero it out for you. You may still have to put your credit card info in just to make sure you're a real person, but it'll comp it to you in for free.
Well, I guess I'll definitely be attending. So
we're excited. I mean, I don't know when this is coming out, but we've got got a class this weekend, a Saturday, and then we just do it the third Saturday of the month. It's just an easy way for everybody, and people really love it because it's like, oh, they like the way I teach because I teach in very layman's terms. I mean, I'm just an average guy that just busts my ass doing this for years, and it's not, I don't blow smoke at people's asses. Hey, here's how you can do it. We got a lot of people that take my classes and gone out and found deals and use what we taught them for marketing and other things, or also how to raise capital too. So it's kind of that three leg stool. You got to know how to market, you got to know how to find deals, and you also got to know how to raise capital or get funding and go from there.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, it's really been just an enlightening and fun conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with my audience and share your knowledge and wisdom of the space. And any closing words, or if you want to drop your social media and stuff like that again.
Just honored to be here, Jake. Thank you so much. It's just this is what I love about podcasting is it's just getting to know people out there. And as I said before, guys, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave Jake a 5-star review if you're listening on iTunes. Share it. Don't share it with your audience. Share this episode has been valuable for you. Share it with at least one person is all Jake is going to ask, or I'm going to ask you. Share it with one person you think will find valuable. You can find me if you just type in one Scott Carson. That's most of my social media handles. 1, the number, Scott Carson, or go to weclosenotes.com and you'll find every way you'll be able to connect there. But like I said, if you're really serious, noteweekend.com, special code Jake will comp you into a class for free.
I love it, man. I love it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And everybody out there, I don't have to say it because you already told them, subscribe, hit the like, ring that notification bell, share it with anyone and everyone that you think might be interested in this topic. And we'll catch you guys on the next Jake Fletcher Show podcast. Thanks so much. Peace.